Hello, and welcome to another podcast on the Theology 101 series. We are now at number 19, which is part two of a section called the Church. Today we're looking at authority. How is decision making, visioning, and guiding within the church made? What is the structure of authority? And here there is a wide diversity within the churches of Christendom. On the one end of the spectrum are the Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches. Here authority is top down. It begins with, in the Roman Catholic, the Pope, the Orthodox, the Patriarch, and then it moves all the way down with in the Roman Catholic, there's cardinals, then archbishops and bishops, and finally all the way down to local priests. And again, they are following the directives, the guidance, the doctrine, everything from the top all the way down. Their role at the bottom end is to convey that and express that, everything from the liturgy, the words they use in the Mass, very little is left up to the independence of the local priest, although they may offer a homily and some words, but ultimately it's directed from the top down, and that's all decisions. A good friend of mine who happens to sit on a parish council in a local, Roman Catholic church says, it's not like being, on a session of elders or in any committee of a Protestant church. He was once a Protestant. He says, here we show up in the council, but basically everything's already decided. We're simply there to say, okay, thanks for letting us know, which he finds particularly frustrating in that regard. Okay, so it's top down. But then there are what we call the mainline Protestant churches that emerged out of the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century in Europe. And these are two main bodies originally. There is the Lutherans, and then there is what we call the Reformed Church. And the Presbyterian Church, what it was called in Scotland, is part of that Reformed branch. There are other names within this Reformed branch body. Any church that says united or uniting generally is within this Reformed branch. They're sister churches with us, the Presbyterians. United, uniting. Then there's Christian Reformed, which is also part of this larger branch of churches. Then there is, in Europe, they're called evangelical churches. They're very different. Evangelical is part of the Reform. They're not like the evangelical churches so-called in North America, in the US and Canada. We'll get to those in a bit. So the Reformed branch, generally within which we find ourselves at Armour Heights, is marked by a balance between, in terms of authority, between clergy and lay people who are part of the congregation. There's always a balance at all levels of governance, all the way to the top, from the main bodies, let's say the national level. In this case for us, we're part of the Presbyterian Church in Canada. We have local synods, and within synods there are a number of presbyteries, and then within presbyteries there are a number of congregations, like Armour Heights is part of the Presbytery of East Toronto, the Synod of, what do we call ourselves now? We've changed the name, Central, Northeastern Ontario and Bermuda, and within obviously the Presbyterian Church in Canada. But at all levels of governance, you have clergy, ordained ministers, and lay people, elders, who also represent. So that decision making is always a sense of equality, and people are chosen to represent the churches within all of these bodies. So very different than a top-down. This is more of a democratic, kind of representative way of making decisions. Okay? But then there are other churches that fit somewhere in between, like the Anglicans, or Episcopalian as they're called in the US. Okay? They would be somewhere between Roman Catholic and mainline Protestant, because they have bishops, and they even have an archbishop in England. But at the same time, there's a lot more authority in the local congregational level than there would be in a Roman Catholic parish. So they're somewhere in between. And then you have Lutherans, and then what came out of the Reform branch at one point, Methodists. So Methodists would be they came out of the Anglican, but they're also very Protestant, mainline Protestants. So they're somewhere in between, like the Lutherans, where they do have bishops, but ultimately the local congregation also has a lot of authority. All right. In our case, as Presbyterians Reformed, we don't have anything like a bishop or so on. You know, people always have a function, whether you're a minister, whether you're even a district, superintendent in some cases. It's purely a functional role. You have the traditional word is an office. So a minister is a teaching elder, other elders are ruling elders. This is purely function, but we have equal status. We each have one vote. That's where our authority lies, because again, it's a level of ultimately the people put us in those places to make decisions and give guidance for the whole, right? So in terms of the authority structure from the top down, you have at the top the Roman Catholic Orthodox, which have very much a top-down structure. Then you have the Anglicans, then you have the Lutheran Methodists, and finally you have the Reformed Presbyterian United group. But now within Protestantism itself, there was a further split of groups who wanted to be even less bound by clergy leadership and even by larger denominational bodies. They wanted to be independent. Each congregation is its own entity. And some of these churches included Baptist, Congregationalist, Mennonite, Brethren. All of these churches, even though there are larger bodies, they don't have any authority over the local congregation. Even a minister has no authority over the local congregation. Each congregation, its council or board, makes decisions for the congregation, whether a minister is there, whether they're hired, they're fired, and so on. This is why typically in a Baptist congregation, unless a minister is well loved, they don't last as long as they do in a Presbyterian congregation, because in a Presbyterian congregation, the presbytery is also involved in protecting or representing the minister as much as the congregation. And ultimately, it's the presbytery that decides the welfare of a congregation. The local elders and the people in the congregation obviously have a strong voice, and they can raise concerns, and they can ask for change, and the presbytery then appoints a body made up of clergy and lay people who then will mediate any conflict or tension within the congregation, let's say between a minister and elders or between ministers themselves. Okay, so this is pretty well the authority structure that we have. And if you have any questions, there's so much more to say around this. And each church body has its own distinctive features. But, we as Presbyterians are somewhere in the middle. We do have larger bodies which allow us, like the Presbyterian Church in Canada or even our local presbytery, to do more because we do it together. Whether it's supporting mission, whether it's providing standards of education, or, holding ministers accountable for the quality of what they do, for their work ethic, for their, we have standards and we hold that as bodies. And we also do mission together. We can do a lot more together than we can do individually and alone. And yet at the same time, we want to serve the will of the people, the fellowship of the people who make up the local church, in terms of everything from choosing a minister to the particular mission and ministry that each congregation will do, the style of its worship, the things that the things that we do, the activities, the programs. Each congregation is responsible, and the elders of each congregation decide together with the minister. But ultimately, we also work together as churches to serve a larger vision and goal. So, any questions? Please pass them along. And thank you for taking in this latest excerpt within the series of church, within the larger Theology 101 series. So we have a couple more to do on the church, and that will be forthcoming in future editions of Theology 101. Thank you.